Okay, so I think we should start, and people will be joining us. Whoever has any problems with the link, our team is already solving it for you guys. Anyway, this session is going to be recorded and it's going to be in our channels, so you're going to be able to enjoy it anyway later after the session finishes. I would like to thank the presence of everyone, the whole audience that is watching us throughout the country. And it's going to be a very exciting panel because we're going to be talking about raising funds in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa region. And we have very special guests. But before, I would like to invite for a welcoming remark, Mr. Roberto Scotto, who's the investment manager of Apex Brazil, and he's based in Brasilia at the moment. So thank you, Roberto Scotto.
Thank you, Ludmila. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Bom dia ao nosso público no Brasil. On behalf of Apex Brazil, I would like to welcome all participants of this webinar. Today, our goal is to talk about Arab investors, investment strategies, and post-COVID-19 impact. Trade and investments between Brazil and Arab countries have been increasing steadily, and there is ample potential to grow even more. In the last decade, there has been an increasing interest from Middle East countries in Latin America opportunities, with greater focus in Brazil. Our distinguished guests, Jawad and Dhabi, will provide us with valuable information on sovereign wealth funds, private equity and venture capital, family offices, and best practices for access to capital post-COVID-19. Before that, I'd like to give you a brief presentation regarding Apex Brazil services and venture capital and private equity industry in Brazil. For the last 20 years, Apex has worked to promote exports, to support the internationalization of Brazilian companies, and to attract foreign direct investment to Brazil. The investment department, jointly with 9 overseas offices, including one in Dubai, supports international investors to find the best opportunities in Brazil. We work with the major sectors of the Brazilian economy, such as agribusiness, automotive, oil and gas, health and life sciences, aerospace, renewable energy, and infrastructure, besides facilitating investments in venture capital and private equity for Brazilian funds and startups. It's important to note that Brazil was the 6th global foreign direct investment destination in 2019, and according US consultancy firm A.T. Kearney, is among the 25 most reliable countries for investments. The opportunities for private equity and venture capital in Brazil have picked up in the last 10 years. The segment dynamism is related to the growing amount of capital committed for investments in the country. The volume has significantly increased since 2009, when a joint initiative between Apex Brazil and the Brazilian Association of Private Equity and Venture Capital, ABVCAP, was developed to connect international investors to Brazilian fund managers and companies. Since then, Apex Brazil has facilitated more than $18 billion of international investors to new commitments to local funds and startups. Currently, Brazil has more than 220 active fund managers, more than 13,000 startups, and 14 unicorns. 71% of the capital committed in the Brazilian private equity and venture capital industry in 2019 came from international investors, an increase of 31.5% considering the 2011 share. The agency works closely with more than 300 financial investors, monitoring their thesis and advising matchmaking opportunities every year. Besides connecting financial investors to opportunities, most recently, Apex Brazil has been promoting investments to develop new technologies and foster innovation through partnerships, soft lending programs, and support to other international research, development, and innovation activities in Brazil. I would like to mention one of our main projects, which is the corporate venture in Brazil. Since 2016, the event has been taking place in São Paulo and attended by many international corporates from all over the world. During the event, we provide site visits, strategic information about the Brazilian ecosystem, and matchmaking rounds between these corporates with Brazilian startups and funds. It would be a pleasure to have all of you with us in 2021. I also would like to invite you to the Brazil Investment Forum, which will take place on May 31st and June 1st in São Paulo. The forum is the largest investment event in Latin America and is organized by Apex with the partnership of the Ministry of Economy and the Inter-American Development Bank. In 2019, we had 1,600 participants from 58 countries. Next year, due to the restrictions imposed by the pandemic, the event will be promoted in a hybrid format, a face-to-face and a virtual forum. Finally, let me state that Apex Brazil stands ready to assist Arab investors and Brazilian companies and funds. You will find more information on the Invest in Brazil LinkedIn profile and on the Apex Investment website, investinbrazil.com.br. Please feel free to contact us in Brazil or in our office in Dubai. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Roberto Scotto. We are really happy here to host high caliber speakers today. My name is Ludmila Figueiredo, the investment officer of Apex Brazil's office for Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. And I would like to thank the presence of Rabi Houri, who's the managing partner and chief exit officer of MEVP, Middle East Venture Partners, one of the leading VC firms in the region, if not the leading VC firm. So, Rabi, thank you so much for your presence. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you. And Jawad Qasim, who's the managing director of the Novo Corporate Advisors, who's the regional head, and he was the regional head of a prominent Brazilian bank in the region, covering sovereign wealth funds and corporates with interests in Latin America. So our Dubai office provides support to everything that Apex Brazil does, including qualification, intelligence, to key stakeholders that we work in straight collaboration. And we are really linked to the Foreign Investment Attraction Division headed by Roberto Scotto here. We support ministries, state agencies, and associations, either in Brazil or here locally in the region as well. But before we kickstart, I'd like to provide you a few takeaways that can benefit your fundraising process here in the region. So one of them is the weekdays. So we work from Sunday to Thursday, and our weekends are Fridays and Saturdays. English is the main spoken language in the top hubs, such as the UAE, although Arabic is the official language. We really focus in long-term relationships in this market. So business is about people taking time to get to know one another, and regular presence and touch base, the usual follow-up is really appreciated. International standards, that's what you're gonna find here in the UAE mainly, but in a few countries that are opening up a lot more these days for the globe. And you're gonna find also with top investors. They look for robust propositions, people that know their business or their projects inside out, that they can present themselves well, that can have a good, well-spoken English. So preparation is really key. Ramadan and summertime are two periods of the year that we usually recommend that you avoid fundraising, because during Ramadan, it's a religious month. So you're gonna probably find people who are fasting, they're working less hours. It's really difficult for them to have the same energy as in a different moment. In summertime, the key decision makers will be traveling abroad. It's very hot here, so you should keep that in mind as well. And lastly, I'd like to talk about economical diversification. So the Gulf countries, they are diversifying their economy from oil, and they are welcoming businesses from different countries. They're opening up and having less bureaucracy in general. And having this mindset of a win-win situation is really important, because it's not only you coming here, raising the money and going back to your home country. It's about also providing something in exchange that can help them develop this region, this market, many different sectors as well. So just keep that in mind, because this is what's going to be ruling the activities from now onwards. And we structured this session into 4 main blocks. So we're going to be talking about sovereign wealth funds, then we're going to go to private equity and venture capital, family offices, and lastly, a few best practices for Brazilian companies, entities, and funds to increase their chances of success as well. So without further ado, I would like to start with Jawad regarding sovereign wealth funds. So Jawad, there are over $3 trillion of accrued wealth from Arab sovereign wealth funds that we found in the Sovereign Wealth Fund Institute. And these assets, they're usually applied in the region and with the long-term proposition, right? So particularly the GCC. Brazil is yet to be one of the main FDI destinations from this region, but we saw in the last decade a lot of interest from this region in Latin America, with a greater focus in Brazil for so many different reasons. And we would like for you to share with us a bit of your experience in terms of who are these sovereign wealth funds, how they are distributed in the region, what are their investment theses and decision-making processes that could consider also pre and post-pandemic.
Sure, pleasure to be here, Ludmila, and pleasure to meet everyone. As Ludmila mentioned, I actually spent the past 9 years or so working for a Brazilian bank. We set up a presence here in Dubai, and the objective of that setup was to try and increase the intermediation between the two regions, right? I remember 15 years ago, I used to work for a quasi-sovereign wealth fund here based in Dubai. And whenever we used to get investment opportunities out of Brazil and Latin America, we used to be very hesitant to look at them just because of the distance and the lack of knowledge of that part of the world. So I was actually very intrigued to be part of the team from Itaú, who decided to plant a flag here in Dubai over 12 years ago, and be able to intermediate between the capital flows between the two regions. As you mentioned, Ludmila, this part of the world has a tremendous amount of capital. It's always been, and I suspect for the next couple of decades, will always be a net exporter of capital, just by the sheer volumes of petrodollars that are being generated on a daily basis. There's always going to be investment destinations for these sovereign wealth funds. So out of the 6 GCC countries, each one of them actually has at least one sovereign wealth fund. We can walk you through them briefly just to get a sense of the different sizes and what they look for and how they look at investments. Starting with the UAE, you have probably the largest out of the 6. You have a couple of players, namely ADIA, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority, which has estimated AUMs of over 750 up to $800 billion. They have been functioning since the 70s, one of the oldest and most organized sovereign wealth fund out of the region, in my opinion. They have actually invested in Brazil. We have been part of a lot of discussions between Brazilian and Latin American players and ADIA that eventually yielded a decent amount of investment. I think ADIA alone has over $2 or $3 billion of investments in Brazil, mostly in infrastructure and real estate, and more so recently in technology and fintech and the digital economy, I would say. You also have Mubadala out of Abu Dhabi, which is an investment company owned by the government of Abu Dhabi. It's not formally a sovereign wealth fund, but functions as such. And they have made a bold investment a couple of years ago into Ike Batista's setup, EBX Group, which eventually turned out to be an excellent experience for them. They actually ended up having a team on the ground. They have 15 plus investment team members in Rio looking at their portfolio and managed to really build on that experience of looking at companies that go through restructuring and distress situations and turn them around and really making a decent amount of money. So they've had a fantastic experience in Brazil, and they continue to look actively at investments in that sector. So between ADIA and Mubadala, you have over $1 trillion basically of assets under management. Yes, as a percentage of their exposure, Brazil continues to be minimal, but compared to 10, 15 years ago, it's definitely increased, and I suspect it will continue to increase. And then you have the Kuwait Investment Authority, which is one of the oldest sovereign wealth funds in the region. They've been around since the 50s. They actually had a significant amount of investments in Brazil since their 70s and 80s. They continue to be large investors globally. They look at very large tickets, anything around $500 million plus. That's actually one of the challenges of many of these investors from the sovereign wealth funds in the Middle East, the ability to find and identify deals that are sizable enough for them to be able to deploy the capital in a way similar to where they would deploy in developed markets. So KIA is more of a passive investor as opposed to Mubadala, which is a little bit more active on the ground and get involved in management. KIA is more of a passive index investor as well, a public investor, and again, 400 billion plus of AUMs. And then you have the Qataris through QIA. QIA is one of the younger sovereign wealth funds out of the region. I think they've accumulated over $300 billion of assets under management over the past 10 years. These guys like to invest in trophy assets. In London, for example, they own the Harrods shopping mall. They own the Shard Tower in London, and in Brazil they actually invested in a couple of deals. Some of them made good returns as well. One of them is Santander Brazil, and the other was an education company alongside a private equity fund in Brazil. And then you have the Saudi sovereign wealth fund, PIF, which has been around for a while, but they've only recently activated their direct investment strategy. And as you guys remember, last year, President Bolsonaro was in the region, was participating in the FII summit in Riyadh. And there was a joint announcement that Saudi would invest up to $10 billion in Brazil, mainly in infrastructure related assets. So they have a couple of subsidiaries, one of which is a food security investor called Salic, which is an active investor in Brazil. They have a stake in a public listed company, Minerva. And they continue to explore investments in the food security sector as well. And then you have two smaller players from Oman and Bahrain. Oman has been also an active investor in Brazil, mostly through private equity funds. They've invested in some of the early stage private equity funds 10, 15 years ago and continue to do so. These guys invest smaller tickets, anywhere between $50 to $100 million. And then there's the Bahraini sovereign wealth fund called Mumtalakat. To my knowledge, I don't think they have any significant exposure in Brazil yet. So that's an overview. I don't know, Rudmila, if you have any specific questions, but definitely my point is there's a lot of money here, and that money needs to find a destination. And although there are challenges in Brazil, mainly FX volatility and the availability of large deals, still we have seen good amount of interaction between these investors and opportunities in Brazil. And I suspect this is only going to grow given the emerging markets importance and the stability of the capital markets in Brazil.
That's great. Thank you so much, Jawad. Maybe we're going to have a few other questions later on, but that's very comprehensive already. So now I'd like to ask Rabi. Rabi, your experience as a VC in the region is outstanding. So it would be very nice to know, how do you perceive the regional ecosystem for private equity and venture capital? And also how these cross-border investments happen, the perception of investors locally with opportunities abroad, such as Brazil.
Thank you, Ludmila. Thank you, Roberto, for having me. It's going to be funny what I'm going to say. There's probably less money targeting venture capital, technology venture capital in the region than you would probably find in Brazil. We have in the Middle East been able to grow some large technology companies like Souq that was acquired by Amazon, like Careem that merged with Uber, like Noon, who's now bigger than Amazon in e-commerce. However, as a VC industry, we're actually quite small. The allocation in the Middle East for technology is 0.02% of GDP. We're 1/14 what India, for example, spends on technology investments. You're going to find this very funny. Jawad, summarized very well the large amount of funds available in our sovereign wealth funds. But the regional sovereign wealth funds were never designed to invest in the region. They were designed to diversify out of the region. They will probably have more exposure to, Brazilian VC funds than exposure to local funds. I know this is a funny statement, but the region is digitized a bit late. We were as you said, we're fairly modern as an emerging market. We actually emerged in the early 70s, probably 15, 20 years before India and China. We're late to the digitization game because our legacy services were actually pretty good. My grandfather used to have a phone in Beirut, so we didn't have to leapfrog. We are at a point now where we have to digitize, and we need more investments. We have been lucky to be the recipient of probably the first 2 checks from sovereign wealth funds who are investing in the region in technology. We received a check from the Waha Fund of Fund, the sovereign wealth fund of Bahrain, and we received a check also from Mubadala, the venture arm of Mubadala. And this was the first step. This happened about a year and a half ago for the sovereign wealth funds to start looking at the region. Now, from a Brazilian perspective, we have raised most of our money in the region, and I know the appetite of regional investors. At the end of the day, regional investors are looking for a good return, transparency, early liquidity. I mean, what you would look for globally from investing. I have not seen a very specific appetite for Brazil. However, I'm sure that can change. I know the VC market quite well in Brazil. Edson Rigonati, one of your leading venture capitalists, was a classmate of mine at Columbia Business School. So I speak to Edson regularly, and I know a bit what's happening in your market. You have to have a proposition. It's very simple. One way, and this will be self-serving for us, is for the larger VC firms or technology ventures in Brazil to acquire some of the local companies in the Middle East that are actually small compared to their Brazilian counterparts as a market entry. I mean, this is what Amazon did when they acquired Souq. This is what sort of Uber did when they merged with Careem. you have to start somewhere. I think there is an understanding in the region that Brazil is quite a developed economy. You know, you're going to find this very funny, but I think football is a really great ambassador. You'll find a lot of you know, Arabs choose one of, you know, the Brazilian team as, you know, their favorite team during the World Cup. I think football diplomacy can go a long way. Also, Brazilians are known globally to be some of the nicest people, so that also helps. But there has to be more education, and I think as Jawad mentioned, Jawad started the education at the top, you know, at the sovereign wealth funds, and we need to sort of address the family offices. Maybe some targeted seminars, etc., will sort of explain what's available in Brazil. Also, there is a benefit that if you look at the developed markets, so let's say, you know, the US, if you look at Europe, valuations are very high. If you look at India and China, also valuations are very, very high. There might be a, you know, a value arbitrage if you look at Brazil, because I know also that you have quite developed capital markets, exits, listings are easy, very modern financial system. So you might position yourself, at least from a valuation perspective, to be much more interesting, you know, as an option.
And do you see this changing now with the pandemic? Are Arab investors more aware in terms of like valuation? They're more, they're considering it a lot more, or you think the dynamics are still the same, and as long as there is a good proposition, a good business, let's do it?
I think the pandemic has changed one thing. We can actually do deals virtually. And because you can have so many meetings, I'm sure you can have virtual Zoom meetings with entrepreneurs, technologists, venture capitalists from Brazil. I think that's easier. In terms of whether they're more aware, a lot of the family offices, you have to remember, especially in Kuwait, in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, have had their sort of their wealth managers showing them transactions as early as the 50s. This is very old money. So you'll be surprised, you'll find that some family offices are already through, you know, a UBS product or a Credit Suisse product or a JP Morgan product already exposed to technology or VC or PE in Brazil. I bet you there are more our sovereign wealth funds are more exposed to the Brazilian technology sector than to the Middle Eastern technology sector. Obviously because of scale, also because your market is much larger.
You touched on family offices, and this is very interesting because we have several types of different of family offices in the region, and there are a few Brazilian companies, entities, and funds who usually raise funds with family offices in Brazil, expecting that they will have the same dynamics as a family office in the region. Does it change any type of corporate structure, any type, like format for co-investments? How do you see that?
There are, if you want, two groups of family offices in the Middle East. You have the older established ones, and those you just deal with them anyway you would deal with any large family office. We've been blessed to have two large family offices out of Saudi Arabia to be our investors, the Olayan Group and the Zamel. They operate like any other global family office, super corporate, professional, targeted. They know their KPIs, they know their asset allocation. However, if you drop to the next level, and this is also because of a new generation of Arabs, especially in the Gulf, taking the helms of family groups, younger people are much more technology trained. They tend to be less structured, but they tend to also want to take a bit more risk. So there's an opportunity on both ends. You know, the smaller family offices are probably less sophisticated, but you know, you want to build a business, you want to start small with the small guys and grow with them. You'll find in the Gulf a very large number of family offices. So there's a lot of potential there. I agree with you.
Very good.
Ludmila, if
yeah.
you allow me, just two points there on the family office as well, just to give you a sense of what Rabia said. You know, Saudi alone has, you know, from my recollection, and Rabia, correct me if I'm wrong, at least 12 or 15 families that each one of them has an average net worth of $1 billion plus. So just to give you a sense, and by the way, a lot of them have been investing in Latin America, in Brazil, exactly as Rabia said, through fund managers, since their 70s and 80s. So I was surprised, walking into a lot of these offices, just trying to educate them about Brazil. A lot of them actually had a very good understanding of that part of the world, mostly from a public equity perspective and debt capital markets as well, given the high yields that you would have achieved being exposed to Brazilian and Argentinian paper in the past. And the second point on the coronavirus impact, at least from a sovereign wealth perspective, what I've noticed, the appreciation for digital businesses and the kind of the immigration into the digital economy. Although a lot of the sovereign wealth funds have been active over the past couple of years, mostly investing in Silicon Valley and developed markets, more so recently in emerging markets. Post COVID-19, it accelerated their strategies and the appreciation for anything to do with digitally enabled businesses. So you no longer hear the sovereign wealth funds talking about we have a technology investment strategy. It is more of technology is an underpinning enabler towards anything we do. So even if we want to invest in food security, has to be done in a technologically and digitally enabled manner. Same with banking, same with real estate and so on. So I think that's probably one of the key changes that I've seen in terms of appreciation towards digital and technology in 2019, 2020, and I suspect this is going to be more elevated going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Technological innovation is cross sectors, cross borders. So I totally agree. And as you're talking, so let's get a few tips from you, Jawad, because you have dealt with a lot of Latin American companies, especially Brazilian companies, and you know how what the behavior, the culture, how they approach investors here in the region. So do you have any tips for either a project or a company to be better prepared and increase their chances of success in fundraising?
Right. Again, one of the positive things I came across is when I first started traveling to Brazil, a lot of the people I would meet, they would either be descendants of Lebanese or Syrian or Palestinian origins. So there is that connection already in Brazil that makes the region much more closer than people would imagine. And the second thing is personalities. There's a lot of similarities in terms of how Brazilians do business and how the Arabs do business. There's a lot of this personal getting to know people and getting to build personal relationships. And whether that's on a small scale investment or on a large scale, sovereign wealth fund, $1 billion plus, I've noticed that the more people interact and the more they get to meet and get to know each other informally, the easier it is to translate into a successful deal. So my advice is always try to build these personal relationships. Find a counterparty, whether it's within a sovereign wealth fund or a family office or a counterparty that you're looking to build a relationship with, and really get to know them on a personal level. Now, maybe over Zoom it gets a little bit more difficult, but hopefully when life gets back to normal, luckily we have Emirates flying daily, twice and 3 times in between Sao Paulo and Rio. That helped us a lot when we used to travel. I always used to recommend to the large corporates to try and fly down here, and on formal and non-formal roadshows, we would go and meet portfolio managers and CEOs and decision makers, just to kind of keep them up to speed. In my initial years at Itaú, we used to arrange analyst meetings and economist meetings and just general meetings across various sectors, almost on a monthly basis. And that helped educate a lot, especially in a region that doesn't know much. At the very beginning, that helped a lot. So flying, meeting people, building personal relationships, that helps a lot. And then one thing I've noticed that varies between the large corporates in Brazil that are listed, that have an organized, let's say, management team, and then on the other end, on the smaller players that are more like early stage and maybe some of the tech players that we came across. Being prepared is very important. Having, you know, proper business plans, having proper articulation of what is it that you're looking for, and if you're asking for a certain amount of capital, what are going to be the uses of those capital, and if you're looking to raise a capital on a global basis, why did you pick the Middle East as a counterparty, or is there any relevance or strategic relevance that you're trying to play in this part of the world? So, you know, being prepared and organized, knowing who the counterparty is, and depending on the scale of that investment, if it's a large infrastructure deal, then it's very clear that the players are the mega sovereign wealth fund, right? ADIA, Mubadala, QIA, PIF, and so on. If it's a food security play, then anyone can play. Even, you know, family offices in Saudi are quite large in poultry and beef, for example. If it's a business relationship you're trying to play, like exports as opposed to, you know, raising capital, then going through the agencies like FX Brazil or the embassy as well. The embassy has done a great job in promoting a lot of these export related activities. So it depends where in what kind of segment of that spectrum you are. You know, at the end of the day, it's just making sure you communicate, getting across the line, and if you can meet people flying here and meeting them or inviting them to meet you in Brazil makes a huge difference, in my opinion.
Yes, Rabi.
Yes, from a VC perspective, in the Gulf, you have several very interesting incubated accelerators that are global by nature. So, for example, Hub 71 in Abu Dhabi, you know, we were the first VC to have an office there in support of the ecosystem in Abu Dhabi. It's the United Nations. You know, there are really no Arabs. It's mostly, you know, people from the world. So for Brazilian companies, technology companies who want to get the attention of investors in the region, if it makes sense, because our market actually is quite interesting from a consumer and from a business perspective for technology products and services, to establish a Hub 71. It's a global, you know, platform. You'll come under the umbrella of Mubadala. You'll be able to speak to ADIA. There are incentive programs from the Abu Dhabi Investment Office that are very important. Mubadala is a large investor with a lot of the big VC funds, including the Vision Fund, for example. That would be a good start. There's also a very strong incubator accelerator in Bahrain as part of Al-Waha program. Saudi Arabia, PIF has created multiple local hubs also. Kuwait is starting to do that. Having some presence here, but presence that makes sense, presence that addresses an interesting market where you can actually make money. We're one of the few, and you know, being Brazilians, you understand the fluctuations of currency. The Gulf is one of the few regions where you don't have foreign currency exposure. All our currencies are linked to the dollar. That's a rarity in emerging markets, where a third of the risk is just a currency risk. So we don't have that. So if some of these Brazilian companies can come and establish in the region in Hub 71, for fintech, for example, there is also, and I know how developed the fintech sector in Brazil is. Hub 71 has a fintech hub, Abu Dhabi Global Markets. The DIFC has a fintech hive. We're also part of it. Bahrain also, Saudi Arabia also. There are certain themes that can actually be very good for Brazilian technology companies. They come, they get exposure, people start knowing them, and people start investing. VC, if it's not done through funds, is hyper local. So you have to be here so that people can see you. And we can help in that dialogue, you know. And for the funds, as Jawad said, they need to do roadshows. They need to come and see people. They need to show people that there's an alternative to investing, let's say in Silicon Valley or in London or in Paris or in China or in India. And I have not seen a lot of Brazilian VC funds come to the region. Not because we're a target, but they usually come, they meet with us, we give them some wisdom, we try to collaborate, maybe they look at some of our companies as an entry to the market. We haven't seen a lot of that, but I think we can work on that.
Definitely, yeah, these are really good insights. So based on what you said, like thinking of the chicken and the egg situation, would you suggest company needs to be present in the region and therefore talk to investors to raise funds for potential acquisitions, growth, scale in the region? Or do you think it would be possible for this company to initiate conversations with investors aiming to be in the region once they secure these investments?
Both. I would like Brazilian companies to come to the region if they believe they can make money in the region. This has to be a commercial decision. And I think the region, especially some of the global hubs like Hub 71, which actually is a global hub, can be quite interesting even for Brazilian companies. Now, if they don't have anything to do in the region, that's fine. They have to come so that people see them. VC is a bit, in a way, touchy-feely because there's a lot of risk in it. You have to get comfortable with the entrepreneur. And sometimes, I understand the limitations of Corona, and I know how far Brazil is, but sometimes the face-to-face can work. And as you said when you started, we function in English in the region. We're fairly accustomed to roadshows by American, European companies. And it's very easy to spend 3 days and hit all the major accounts. It can be quite an effective roadshow. And, as you said, skip Ramadan, skip the summer, and then you'll have the best weather in the world.
True. It's the best weather to raise funds and to stay here, right? But you said something that is really important, and this is like a highlight for Brazilian companies, but companies in general across the world. I think we're in a bubble and raising funds is trendy, right? So whenever you're thinking internationally, you think of, I need to raise funds in that country, but actually you need to do business in that country. So for you to have a sustainable business, first of all, you need to think of your clients. How can I secure clients in that market? And that should be the priority for most of the companies that we deal with. But usually people come and I need investment, but actually you need to secure that you can sustain the business. That's an amazing tip. Thank you so much, Rabi.
The Middle East and the Gulf has been, 10 years ago, sort of the last stop on a roadshow. People here are much, much sophisticated. And I think, look, from an emerging market to an emerging market, there's, as Jawaz said, a lot of collaboration that can happen. I think culturally we're pretty close. We have warm communities, and we speak English. We love football, so it's a very easy icebreaker as a conversation.
True. And in terms of setting up the company, let's say that a company finally was able to get funds from the region. Do you think that this is the tradition in general to set up a business locally, or would investors be comfortable with a special purpose vehicle, an SPV elsewhere, like Delaware, British Virgin?
It depends. That's a question more for where will you exit eventually? Because if you're targeting an IPO in the US, you better have a Delaware entity. Having an entity here, I mean, there are regularities to be able to have, to function, to have a trade license, to actually sell your products and services. And between the entities in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, in Qatar, in Kuwait, and Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia, the level of red tape is dropping very quickly. You know how Dubai and Abu Dhabi, how fast it is to open a company, to establish offices. We have very good infrastructure. We have good telecom infrastructure. We have good banking services. We're a very, very modern, emerging market, and we all speak English. So it's actually quite easy.
True. And Jawad, do you see the same in the other type of businesses that you have supported?
What I wanted to say, there is a very successful Brazilian investment in the region that until this day has made has made the headlines, which is BRF and Sadia Chicken. They have been operating in the region since the 70s, and initially they started just exporting, and then they elevated that into some joint ventures with the local distributors in Saudi being the largest market and the UAE second largest market, and then across the region. And then they figured it out that if the closer they get to the customer and the closer they get to the market, with a presence on the ground, with a management team on the ground, the better the results are going to be. And that really paid off. The past 10, 15 years, BRF has been investing significantly in this part of the world. They have a processing plant in Kizad here in Abu Dhabi, and they've invested over $300 million just setting it up. And they're having plans in the kingdom in Saudi, and it's a public listed company. You can see how much they have been exporting and selling in the region. The case study is that the closer you are, if you have a product that is in demand and they've really perfected the halal chicken slaughtering and processing and packaging and sending it across 3 continents and still having a significant market share in the region, still having a team on the ground with marketing and sales and distribution capabilities on the ground made a huge difference for them. So again, it depends what kind of product and in what sector you are operating. If you're a digital company, then you don't necessarily have to be on the ground. But as Rabia said, there are a lot of subsidies and facilitations that the government, especially in Abu Dhabi, is quite open to, and free offices and some grants and leases, facilitations on leases and costs and all of that, which would help incubate a number of these early stage investors that are coming out of Brazil and Latin America. So definitely worthwhile considering that, in my opinion.
Perfect, thank you. Actually, I want to touch base in a different type of investment, or actually a different size of investment. We received many questions, and I'm already putting them together and making them here for you. But one of them is, okay, Brazilian companies in technology are getting more awareness nowadays, let's say in the region. Last year during GITEX, one of the main exhibition fairs for technology, we had the biggest winner was a Brazilian. We had another finalist who also won a prize. And this year we had also one shortlisted and one company winning the Supernova Challenge. So there, for 2 consecutive years, we had Brazil winning the main award. And this is a great achievement, and this shows the potential that we have in collaboration with the region. Now, this, of course, attracts a lot more startups who are raising less amount of funds. And we're talking about the billions in sovereign wealth funds, but how is it for companies who are like early stage that would be in need of capital? Do you think that they would succeed in the region at this stage, or they have to mature themselves a bit more until they are ready for expansion? It can be for us first, yes.
For a local investor, even if a family office, to invest in an early stage company in Brazil that has a Brazilian business is going to be difficult. But as you said, the Brazilian company used GITEX as a forum to be here, to present, to be compared to other global peers, and was chosen as the winner of the competition. You always need that local, you have to see them here, Ludmila. The world is pretty large, and so if you have investors who are interested in getting exposure to the technology sector in Brazil, and we even advocate this to local investors, it's better to go through an established Brazilian VC fund, not to do the direct. Direct in technology, unless you're doing very, very early stage, and these are just options, small checks, is not the right way to get exposure to a sector. The portfolio built by an experienced VC firm can help a lot. So we don't even advocate for our local investor to do direct investments in the Middle East. So I think doing it directly in Brazil is going to be a bit of a stretch.
Agreed. Yeah, that's what we've seen as well. And in terms of investment process, including, let's say, due diligence, and as well as the length, how long does it take for a company from the time that the company or the state agency starts start having discussions with the investor until money is in the bank? Usually, do you have a time frame that you work with, either for Rabi and then Jawad?
If you're selling, it's always too slow. And if you're buying, the other side complains we're always too slow also. So it depends. I think at least from an MEVP perspective, we're a very, we're an institutional investor. We have sort of the same processes as you find in the US. Walid Hanna, Walid Mansour, and myself, the three managing partners, have all worked internationally in Canada, in the US, and Europe. So we have, you know, international standards. There are a bit less restrictions on KYC, especially if you're working with a local fund that is well known. We can help with that. Establishing companies actually is quite fast. And we don't have foreign currency issues. We run a dollar book, so you remove that piece. Now, diligence really always depends, is really case by case. It depends on our bandwidth, and it depends on how ready the target is. Sometimes, and this is unfortunate, some foreign companies always believe that us Arabs are not very well prepared, etc. And they come and meet with MVP and they think we're German. So, you know, it depends on the fund, it depends on the company. But look, we run international processes, at international standards. These are the right ways to do investments. We're not cowboys.
From a sovereign wealth fund perspective, with Mila, if I may answer, they also, it's case by case. I've seen deals that have taken 20 days from A to Z, you know, a couple of $100 million to be invested, and I'm still participating in deals that are 3 years old and haven't gotten to the finish line. So I don't think there's a set answer, but maybe in general, I would say sovereign wealth funds have their own processes as well, and it's not easy to expect them to act very fast. They have to go through processes and certain governance, and you know, there are certain levels and tiers of validation, and the bigger the deal, sometimes the faster the response, just because there is strategic interest, but at the same time it could be you know, more scrutiny, and it could take a while. So I don't think there's a specific answer. It's really case by case, but the more, from experience, the more compelling the investment opportunity and the more attractive it is, the faster it is that it gets to the finish line. Also, let me just add a quick point. Arab and especially Gulf investors tend to really want to build long-term relationships. So it's worth the investment, in my opinion. I think Jawad will share that, would agree with me. If you end up having an investment relationship with the sovereign wealth fund, or you know, one of the established family offices, this will be a sticky long-term relationship. So it's worth investing in it. Definitely. Sovereign wealth funds are very long-term investors, rarely request exits. They like to have them just for, you know, a rainy day, but in general, long-term friendly capital, supportive to management, supportive to other stakeholders. If I always used to tell our clients in Brazil, if I had a business and I was looking to raise capital, you know, I would make it a priority to have someone from the Middle East as a you know, supportive shareholder for sure.
Perfect. We have a few other questions here. One of them is about scams. You know, the millionaires of the Arab world trying to send or raise money here and there. We see this all the time, and this is kind of international that is happening, right? And it's getting each time more sophisticated. How could you give some tips for people to avoid these frauds and scams? I don't know any. Maybe Rabia, you know some. Can we talk about some Brazilian scam artists or not? Yeah, I mean, I think we're very competitive at this level, right? I know. Look, it's again, if it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Check references, make sure everything is checked, and call people. People here are accessible. It's actually quite easy to check, and just call people like Jawad, like myself. Some people are established, and you can very quickly figure out if somebody is legit or not. And that's why we always used to advise, you know, go through, you know, an advisor, whether it's a large, you know, investment bank or a small boutique bank, or a call to FX Brazil or to the embassy here in Abu Dhabi, or that's, you know, always makes a lot of sense. And I've seen a number of them on both sides of the continents. But Rabia is absolutely right. You know, always cross-check and make sure you do your diligence. Yeah, we have supported a few companies as well. And what we usually say is like the basics, right? So you have to check the website, the social media, the LinkedIn profile, and just by clicking, you're gonna see some weird things. So that these are the basics. Just a lot of research will help you to get a picture of where you're stepping into. I totally agree as well. Looks like we covered pretty much everything. We have a few other questions here in this chat, but we're not going to be able to do all of them because we already reached at 5 p.m. Dubai time, 10 a.m. Brazil time. And I just wanted to ask you if you can pick 3 main sectors that you believe it's going to be, that will have a huge potential for investment attraction and companies setting up as well in the region. What would you be looking at, Rabi, and then Jawad?
Very easy. Health tech, fintech, and a third sector which would be important for Brazil is food tech. Now, we've been talking about food security. I'm always perplexed when people invest in Brazil, and I'm not saying that, you know, our sovereign wealth funds should not invest in food assets in Brazil. But I mean, if you have a global issue, a pandemic, sometimes it'd be hard to actually bring the food over here, right? Especially if the local country has some shortages or there's some moratorium on exports. We have to try to build some staple food production in the region. And the region is, you know, water poor but energy rich, so you can desalinate. So you can find a way, and there's enough land. So we need to see more food tech, and I know Brazil is on the really some of the leaders globally in food tech. We need to see more of them here, bringing some innovative ways of building food stables or building, for example, feedstock for fisheries or for some other things you can do here using insect technology for protein, for cattle, for fish, etc. And I have not seen a lot of food tech technology from Brazil. Recently, we've seen much more come from Israel, but this is something that the Brazilians should look at. Also, fintech, I know how developed the fintech sector in Brazil is. It'd be nice to see some other companies come. Some of the local banks will be very interested in getting some of these technologies. And health tech, the Middle East is, getting a bit, fatter if you want, sedentary lifestyle, too much of a good thing. And we need a bigger investment in health tech. So from MBB's perspective, these are 3 large sectors that we think are going to attract a lot of investment in the future.
Absolutely, I agree with Rabi. And on the other side of it, from a Brazilian perspective, I think infrastructure will continue to be a major attraction for sovereign wealth funds. Real estate, maybe less so, given the new dynamics of the sector and less footfall to retail assets and people working from home. So I think there's going to be a shift in the dynamic. But there's been an increasing interest in logistics assets and warehouses and data warehouses and anything to do with the digitally enabled, again, real estate aspect of things. I think education is of interest, education with a digital angle as well. Food security, we've always talked about it, but I agree with Rabi. I think there's an opportunity for smaller players to come and establish here, and you'll find that the governments are quite supportive, whether it's Abu Dhabi or Oman or Saudi or Qatar. I think the entire region here is quite open to welcome players that have great ideas, proven case studies, and they're ready to capitalize them. So I think there's never going to be a lack of interesting sectors, and capital is there. It's just trying to intermediate it in the right way and structuring it in the right way, and good things will happen eventually.
Sounds good. Yes, thank you so much. I think we crossed the time now, but that was a very nice final remarks. I'd like to thank everyone, especially Rabi and Jawad. Thanks for your time as well and effort that you put into this. And it was an amazing session. I'm sure that we're going to be able to share this with a lot more people who wanted to attend this session as well. And I thank everyone who watched it so far. We're gonna be able to do a lot more in the coming months and 2021 because we're gonna be hosting the Expo 2020 here in the UAE. Apex Brazil is leading this front along with other entities in Brazil from a federal and state level. So watch out, we're gonna have a lot coming. Thank you so much.
Pleasure having us. Thank you, Ludmila.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Obrigada, pessoal.